Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to another Storytime special. This one will serve as our 26K special, which, to start things off, I just want to say thank you to everyone that's been subscribed and is following this story. We've come a long way, and I still got so many stories to tell yet. And I know this story is delayed. Also, we have a couple other specials to catch up on too, but better late than never. A lot of you guys know I've just been taking care of things in my personal life, which I do have to say, things feel like they settled significantly compared to where I was last year. So I'm just really excited to keep killing it with the content. Like this story here, more substances explained, topic videos, new series, more reports from you guys of course. It's all a great time and I love being able to connect and help a lot of you out there. So again, thank you if you are a subscriber. If you're new to this channel, this video, well, let's dive right into this story so you can get an idea of what's up. If you mess with it, don't forget to like and subscribe. But today, as you can tell by the title, I'm going to talk about the time I seed flipped, taking both LSA, Hawaiian baby Woodrose seeds, and MDMA together, which not the best combo, and I'll explain why later. Now, I ended up taking this just like a week later from my last story, just a few days or so after my first court date and drug test. I do recommend you tune into the last story we dropped, the time I went to jail for X pills, as it does set up this experience heavily and the way I was feeling, and what I was thinking somewhat. It was a huge learning experience for me, and really impacted the course of my life in ways. And I have to say that this experience would help turn that for the better. So that's kind of where I want to start with this though, how things were trying to return to my life after jail, and with regular drug testing on the way, and just how all this made me feel internally. One of the biggest issues were of course my parents, especially my stepdad. Basically he got super shitty when he drank, and he would make you feel like garbage and try to put you down in ways, or just make life more difficult in ways than they had to be. Which there's a fair balance with discipline, but he would overdo it. And I think just because of all what happened was just so big, he didn't even want anything to do with me. Like he just didn't want to face the reality that I actually fucked up like that, and that I was into this type of stuff. And a big thing that didn't help is my family's history also. I don't think I brought it up all too much, just in pieces here and there, but my birth parents, my grandparents, my younger brother even, they've been in jail for many things, including drug-related charges, for things like heroin, cocaine, and more. Of course my stepdad knew about this and thought I was going in this direction. So it was like the stress and expectations went up tenfold. It took like 3 days before he actually talked to me. And I don't remember all the specific details, but the point is, things were different, and I had to deal with this stupid court shit now. And me having to go to court was one of the biggest things I feel like would keep the stress around and set this man off even further, because he always came with. And then my mom, and seeing how disappointed she was, it was terrible. So especially with my environment and what I had to deal with at the time, I was surrounded in a somewhat stressful and depressing period. The start of something that would become heavy down the road. And as all this was beginning to unfold, as I noticed these differences in my day-to-day life, a big thing I just wanted to do to relax and clear my mind up was to smoke some weed. But I had drug testing coming up, which I know as messed up as it seems, a huge reason why this period sucked so hard was because I wasn't able to freely smoke. Not saying I looked to smoke to escape from my problems, but smoking will help me take them in and handle them better I feel like. So it really sucked having to stop that, especially with the withdrawals of staying up late as fuck, like 4 or 5 hours later than I normally would have. Then not fully sleeping all the way too. Also food and appetite was a huge thing, in all sorts of ways. It would affect how often I would be hungry and how much I was able to eat, and also how well I felt the digestion process go. I could feel more of the process itself and how rough it could be. And of course some smaller things like irritability, cravings and whatnot would also be experienced. Because of this though, I cranked things up on heavy on working out, especially with running, and this helped level things out somewhat, though it would take some time before these symptoms left. Anyways, getting a little off track here, I just wanted to explain well what my situation was leading up to this and how I had to adjust my life in ways, both internally and externally. Which the external factor was my biggest issue. Internally, I was doing somewhat fairly well. I remained optimistic and focused on the things to be grateful of. things I could work on, and my interest. But I had this first drug test to take, which wouldn't matter a ton. Evan and I had been talking regularly though, and we were still planning things out in regards to drug use, but also just in life. We brought out things like traveling, doing long bike rides, hiking, camping, and all this stuff we wanted to get into. We had already started going on a couple bike rides. And then Evan thought my withdrawal state was more so because of the tobacco wraps we would always use, which was probably partially true. And also the drug testing would inspire me to look into alternatives that won't come up on a drug test, which would affect my usage in the future to come, sooner than later. But Evan and I wanted to have an experience to break away from those bad vibes. We both agreed we just needed something that would say fuck all that getting arrested, going to jail, drug testing, the car getting impounded, and everything else. We were set on still having good times and living a good life. And one thing that stuck with me that we could get with ease was the DXM. And it was something that wouldn't come up on a drug test. If you haven't yet, go check out my first time trying DXM story, as I had a beautiful first time trip on a second plateau with Evan. Also the time we combined Hawaiian baby Woodrose and DXM. That didn't go very good on the come up, but I love what came in later in that trip. But I brought this up to him and he was somewhat down with it. What we really wanted was some more tabs, which, another story, the time we first tried 1P LSD treated us very well and we would have loved another trip with it. What would end up happening was really just about a chance. But originally, the plan was to trip on DXM. Evan wasn't crazy about the DXM, especially after our second trip, but I saw the potential for how beautiful it could be, and desired to be back in that. It would be perfect given the circumstances. But this wouldn't happen, as you can tell by the title of this video. Nope, things played out differently, as life tends to often do for most of us. I know coming into this though, I simply just wanted some type of strong experience with my tripping partner, my good friend Evan, and I was pretty satisfied with how it turned out, and it was really what I needed on a social level, but we'll get into that when I describe the effects. But anyways, a few days before, I took my drug test and got that shit over with, which was stressful. And after the fact, I was making sure with Evan about our plans for that weekend, which we were talking about the DXM study and how much we wanted to do. One thing for sure was that Evan was going to get a hotel for us, so we would have a good safe place to be for our trip. The plan before the whole jail incident was to actually have a little hotel party with the ex we had before, I think for his sister's birthday, and then take our break. Of course, things didn't go as planned, so Evan wanted to try and make up for it, but I know it was only a fraction of what he wanted it to be. But Evan said he wouldn't want as much DXM this time, reason being because of how strong the last trip was on it. I, on the other hand, was telling him I wanted to hit the third plateau, and really wanted to explore it. He said I was wild, which just check out the intensity of our last trip and you'll understand why. But I was game and saw DXM as a way of healing. Again, we wanted psychedelics or even X, but we couldn't get any. Now, I don't think I mentioned this fact before, but it was my brother who gave us the X last time, and this fact would play a strong role in my experience this night, in a few different ways. But we had planned to do it just the next day, and Evan was going to possibly invite one of our friends. She's been in some past stories, I believe, and that would be Sarah. Evan wanted to get most of our friend group together, or at least a good amount of the homies, but most of our friends will be busy this weekend. Now if you remember, from my first time taking LSA story, Sarah actually took some Hawaiian baby Woodrose seeds with us, so she had an idea of what was up. She was down to try new things and liked to trip, so she was a good vibe to bring around. But that's basically what was happening and how things were for me coming into this story. Life hit me pretty hard and I had to make adjustments, but I was faring well mentally and kept optimistic to still make things great. And this night here would give me a much needed support. So let's actually get into this day starting in the mid-afternoon or so. I've been heavily looking forward to this night and thought we were going to be doing DXM. And my day went pretty casually like normal, just me focused on my creative interest, which at the time was partially another YouTube channel I had before this one. But to start things off, the homie Marcel would actually hit me up before this. He called me up to see if I was down to hoop, as he was with a couple of our friends. A couple guys I don't think I've mentioned before, but our homies that will come up in future stories at some point. We'll call these guys David and Chris. But they slide over and we run a few games of basketball. Marcel did invite me to go hang out with them afterwards, which I wasn't sure when I was going to see Evan, so I said sure. I'm pretty sure we just went over to his crib, ran some Call of Duty or some 2K, and just hung out with the boys. So after this, I texted Evan, and he got back to me saying that I could do the decks while he would probably drink, and we could still try to find LSD. Then he wasn't sure if he wanted to drink this night, then do DXM the next night. He wasn't really too sure. It said he wanted to do something this night. The big problem was we didn't have the whip to use, so we tried to get our friend Isabel to help set things up, but she wouldn't come through this night for us. I remember waiting since like the late afternoon to get things ready with Evan. Then finally, around like 10 or 11, he just told me to bike ride. We wasted time waiting for Isabel, but it was cool because I got to eat and get ready properly beforehand. I made a good handful of posts on Snapchat, just out in the dark, and I was just basically ready. But I told him fuck it, and I'll take the bike ride over to the hotel. And at this point, Evan just wanted us to drink really, and we would do the DXM the next day. But another problem with that, we weren't a drinking age yet, so we needed someone to get something. And Evan said if we couldn't, we could do the DXM or the LSA, which the LSA he brought up out of nowhere. But I could tell he was craving a psychedelic. Now I didn't have any DXM on me at the time, so we would have to hit up Walmart or something to grab some, which it was still 24 hours at this time. But I made sure to bring the Hawaiian baby Woodrose seeds, as I was intrigued because Evan told me this time he had a way to bypass the nausea. Which it wasn't anything new, it would be through a cold water extraction, which we tried the previous time, but was barely made effective because it only soaked for about an hour. But he didn't tell me a ton, but to bring some cups and some mixers too. So I just got ready and made my way over there. I took my time as I didn't want to post up at the hotel alone, but Evan called me along the way and said he booked the hotel. The ride over there was nice and chill, as it was warm out. There was a bit of traffic along the way, but nothing I wasn't used to. I was excited though, and eventually got there, walked up to the hotel and met up with Evan. I brought my bike in and put it next to his, and we shook up. Not even a minute later though, this dude Evan said he would be right back, that he had to pick up weed from his plug, and then he was going to see my brother to pick up some ecstasy. Then Sarah was bringing some alcohol, as she was of age, and he told me to start the LSA extraction. Which this just came out of nowhere, and he barely gave me any time to process it or ask questions before leaving out the door. But it was cool, we were getting some X now. And for this, I had to recommend checking out my first time trying ecstasy story, as I really expressed deeply how therapeutic it is for me, and how it naturally interested me, as it could be helpful with my ASD. And this night here would open me up in a lot of ways. But before that, I would be chilling in the hotel for a bit and prepare the extraction. He left me his mortar and pestle, and I went ham breaking out the seeds. I believe I did something like 8 to 10 seeds for each of us. Then with a strainer, I let them soak in cold water, and this would sit for like 2 or 3 hours before the seeds were removed. Evan had quite the bike ride to go on, as I know his plug was a few miles away or so from where we were, and the same was true for my brother. So it was something like an hour before he came back, and another hour or so before Sarah pulled up. But after a while of waiting, Evan finally came back through with both weed and X pills. And then we chilled and talked for a bit while we waited on Sarah, as he got 3 X pills. And with all this waiting and figuring things out, we really didn't get started until like 2 or 3 in the morning. Which again, this was all kind of a surprise for me in ways, because my brother told me he couldn't get them, and now all of a sudden he was able to late as fuck. And then with the LSA, we had talked about wanting to do a candy flip, but since we couldn't get actual LSD, we tried to settle for what we thought was the next best thing. Which, let me talk a little bit about this combo and why it probably isn't a good idea, even though the two did have some great synergy this night. Now this combo itself can be considered to be pretty strong, especially with the potential nausea floating around. But in terms of actual intensity, it's maybe like half of a candy flip, a bit less intense. And I do have to say, since we didn't eat the seeds, there thankfully wouldn't be any nausea this night. Which the Hawaiian baby Woodrose nausea was some of the worst nausea I've ever experienced to this day. But I'd be a bit more concerned with a potential vasoconstriction both of these can cause. It is more notable with the LSA in my experience, but pretty much all stimulants can cause a degree of vasoconstriction. I don't think there have been any fatal cases with this cause, but that doesn't mean it can't be a very discomforting aspect in the experience. But this wouldn't happen to me very much this time, but it would in a future combo in a future story. Just something to be aware of. But anyways, Evan and I were chilling for a little bit, doing some research on the LSA and MDMA combo. Which back then, it was maybe like 2 or 3 reports I think from the DMT Nexus or like Blue Light. Now I believe the combo has been considered at least 10 times that amount. Still, this is a pretty rare combo, and the title of this video is inspired by a Reddit post, since there is an official name for this flip, but the term seed flipping seemed fitting. But it was more difficult to get a good gauge because some people ate the seeds, some people did extractions, some people reported still having nausea, some reported having these mind-blowing experiences. So there was a balance of uncertainty, but with each passing moment, we grew more intrigued. Evan really wanted a psychedelic experience bad. He had been wanting one since our 1PLSD trip. But eventually around 3 AM or so, Sarah showed up. She brought a case of Coronas, which I wouldn't drink this night, but then she also brought a little bit of cocaine. So we were really set, and I would show this picture I took as it is classic as fuck, but I'm not going to because we are on YouTube. But I remember on this little table, Evan was rolling some blunts, some White Owls I remember, with a few Coronas out, 2 being set down by them. And thinking on it now, I may have taken a swig, but after I got the feeling that I wouldn't want any for this experience. Then also, we just had a fat ass line of cocaine lying on the table, with the 3X pills right next beside it. Then of course, our LSA extraction going on to the side, right next to an Arizona tea that Evan was drinking, and some food he got from the store when he was out. And the pills were Darth Vader's, if you're wondering, and they would be very effective. But once we got things set up, we got ready to dose. We all took the MDMA first, and then Evan and I planned on drinking our cup of LSA extraction. Sarah didn't want to have the LSA again because of how it went the last time. But we all took the MDMA, and then Evan and I went for the extraction. Which I had to say that it looked like straight out yellow piss, kinda on par with the Coronas. And I wasn't really looking forward to this because I took a quick smell and it was gross and immediately reminded me of how the seeds were. But we pulled out the seeds with the strainer, and then we both took a sip. And I remember we both looked at each other and had the grossest looks on our face. It tasted like straight ass, which I don't have a great way to describe it really. It was like the seeds with this rancid earthy taste that just made your face and stomach scrunch up, but in a liquid form this time. So it spread and stayed in your mouth way worse I feel like. And right after that, Evan just put his drink down and was like, nah, fuck all that gross shit. But I on the other hand said fuck it and just started to take down some chugs. I didn't finish all of it because I was probably gonna throw up if I didn't stop, but probably about 80% of it. I just took his tea and used it to clear the taste. He looked at me like I was wild, but in my head I was just like, let's just do it and try to see what a candy flip would be like. And after this, Evan and Sarah lit up some squares and we just proceeded to talk casually. I wasn't smoking the squares at the time, but I'm sure with how the room got, I got a good amount of secondhand exposure this night. But not even 20 minutes after taking that, Evan wanted to light up a blunt. Which, this fucking sucked, man. And I should have just smoked this night, but because of the drug testing, I decided against it. I was cool with the MDMA because I had researched it should be clear out of my system at most a week. I didn't know how my body was with cannabis and drug testing, and I wasn't about to risk it like that until I was clean and knew I could pass a drug test easy. Which, with my metabolism, I know I would have been fine looking back, but better safe than sorry and end up back in jail. So I think for the first blunt, I went outside and just waited for them, and then the same for the second. But the third, fourth, and fifth, I was in the bathroom, which I honestly didn't mind very much. I wasn't gonna trip about them smoking, plus this gave me time to go on my phone a bit and talk to some people about things. But for this first blunt, I was still coming up and it hadn't hit just yet. But by the time they finish and I go back in like 20 minutes later or so, I start to notice the first effects. One thing was, I just felt a sense of ease come over me and this general feeling of happiness. and it was very smooth throughout. And one thing that stuck out right away for me were that lights felt a lot brighter, in a similar way to my first MDMA experience. But I felt like this was slightly enhanced a bit, possibly from the LSA combination. And I was telling them all of this, and they were starting to come up too. Which I had to say that this experience was heavily driven by us just talking about whatever thing's going on. Many things with our personal lives, our interests, things we wanted to do, certain viewpoints, just all kinds of stuff. But one big thing this night that just came out naturally for me was my explanation on my ASD. To Sarah, but a good deal with Evan too. Because if you hang around me enough and get to know me, you can probably spot some traits. And here's the thing. I never really talked about my ASD to anyone at all. Not at all to my peers. Which I do explain this in depth somewhat. I made a video of being on the spectrum and how I was growing up. One of those things included being bullied. And I think this past experience made me just want to bottle all that up and never really talk about it to anyone. I didn't want to be judged or looked at some type of way. And this would be true of everyone I met. These days it is a bit different as I can't comfortably talk about this. But that might not be the case if I didn't have an experience like this. So I just started to explain it all, and I remember Evan was happy I was doing it, that I was being open about something I never brought up, and he could get some more insight about me. Then Sarah told me she would have never guessed I had ASD if I never brought that up. Which I think this complicates things at times, because I can get by fairly easily at times as not having it, or having any condition. But I've learned that's not necessarily what's best for me, and especially for people I interact with often. It'll be better for me to be open and upfront about these things, so we all have a better understanding and cooperation, and overall better relationship. But again, this was just huge for me, because I wouldn't have done this otherwise if we hadn't taken MDMA like this, and future experiences would reaffirm these feelings and openness. But I'm not really going to do a play-by-play with the timeline so much, as the night didn't really feel like that. But we will be rolling till like 8 or 9 in the morning. I will feel some slight vasoconstriction later on in, but I have to say I didn't really feel the side of the LSA that strongly. Some slight haze and tracers I feel like, but this was dominantly an MDMA experience. And they were solid X pills, strongly dosed, so I'm not surprised. And I was more so focused on the therapeutic aspects I got this night that I didn't really focus on if I was tripping. But there was some slight synergy that better helped set the tone I feel like. But anyways, I remember talking about having this strong interest in substances, which I know these events helped inspire me to make this channel, all these stories leading up to it, but that was still a couple months away from this. But I remember Sarah telling me she wanted to try at least every drug out there at least one time. Which man, that would be such a fucking feat to accomplish. So I just started telling her about all these kinds of substances out there. And when I got around to the Torah, I think I may have changed her mind. It's probably impossible to do, considering how much is out there, how rare some things are, then how abundant new substances are being introduced all the time. But the Psychonaut will continue to pursue. Anyways, they lit up again and I went outside. And I started to text some people. Some of my friends, who I just started saying things like how much I appreciate them for being in my life, and things I don't say enough often. Then I texted my mom, telling her how I loved her, how I was safe, and not to worry about anything. But a big person I texted throughout this night was my brother, as he was one of the few people actually still awake at this time. And I won't go into too much detail about this, but basically we talked about the jail incident, some of the specifics that went down, then how to go about things moving forward, how much we appreciate each other as brothers, things we have gone through in the past, growing up, then me telling him about my ASD also, and him telling me about his problems that he goes through. It's a very complicated situation I don't want to get into very much, but my brother and I didn't grow up together in the same house, and we always tried to be around, but it was something that made that difficult. Anyways, it was very therapeutic to text all of these people throughout the hours. Then of course, talking with Evan and Sarah and enjoying the role. Every time they smoked, I would be in the bathroom or something, and I would have a good amount of time to myself just to think. But they drank a bit, and I remember we brought up maybe doing the cocaine. I might have done it, but I was playing it safe this night and recommended them to do the same, since you shouldn't stack stimulants and how that can cause cardiac stress. So everyone just said fuck that, and it just sat on the table like sun decoration. Then I remember Evan, he was trying to get on some other shit. Basically this guy was trying to get some pussy. Now there were 2 beds, and Evan and Sarah were on one bed together. They've known each other for a while at this point. But I remember even before this, Evan was saying something that he would try to set up the situation to where we could basically like double team. Which, just ridiculous, man. I was just kind of like, alright, whatever bro, we'll just see what happens. Because, for one, I would be a bit weirded out if something like that were to actually happen, because Evan and I have never done some shit like that. 2, at that point, I was more enthralled in the magic this experience was bringing me. It was similar to my first role in ways, but I saw just how much being open can enhance things so much. And these feelings felt amazingly fresh and beautiful to me, while sex didn't necessarily align with that at the time. It could have also been due to the LSA. But anyways, I remember they kissed a bit, and we eventually turned off the lights and put on some random movie. Evan was really trying to make it happen, which it was a little awkward as I just went on my phone and listened to music. Which I did forget to mention, we had music on pretty much the whole time. It was a fair spread of hip hop, but some names that stood out were G Herbo, Kodak Black, and Lil Fo. We would always listen to drill style music, especially off a roll. But Sarah said she wasn't really comfortable doing it with 2 guys like that. And that was pretty much that. We lay down, and I think they got tired around 8 or 9 and took a quick nap. We had the curtains closed, but I could already tell it was going to be a sunny day. I still had effects going on, which again, it's most likely the case that it was synergy from the LSA, and I wouldn't go to sleep until the early afternoon. But before that, I kept texting some people, and eventually they got up. Of course they smoke again, and we go get our things together and go check out. I have to say stepping outside felt really good, but I did feel the tiredness from not sleeping at all. The sun was beautiful, and so was the sky. And I felt very refreshed in ways, and motivated to live. The events of going to jail and whatnot were pretty absent from my mind, and I was feeling fantastic mentally. But we go check out and then say peace out to Sarah, and she drove off. Evan and I got on our bikes and started heading back, which it was a good vibe. We put on the music and parted ways after about 5 minutes. It was nice and cool out, and I felt like the world was filled with opportunity and possibility. Things truly felt beautiful. I had little effects at this point, just on the come down really. But the bike ride back was nice, and I got home and made some food, played a couple games of Hearthstone, then I knocked out by 12 or 1. Only slept for a few hours, and when I got up, I have to admit I felt like garbage. It was a beautiful experience and trip, but my body was feeling the lack of sleep. But I tried to go back to sleep and couldn't, and was just up for a while feeling like garbage. The only reason I got up was because I was thirsty as fuck. Which this night, we were lacking on this. We had like no water. I told Evan I pissed like 10 times throughout. And I guess it didn't register, I needed to rehydrate until way later. Just a rookie mistake we made. You gotta be hydrated and have hydration for your roles. But that's pretty much the story. Not too much of a wild story, but it was beautiful for me, and was really an experience I needed to have after all that bullshit. And you may be wondering, if you kept up with these stories, did Evan and I finally slow down after this? And I do have to say, we did slow down after this. But that doesn't mean we stopped completely. And that doesn't mean I stopped myself completely either. I would have some mind-blowing experiences in the weeks to come. But the cannabis use did stop, at least until my next drug test, which was like 25 days or something from this point in time. But basically because of this, I was better able to focus in and appreciate the good things in life. I started to prepare for chapter 2, which is just a whole different ride from chapter 1. But before that, we have a few big trips left, so I'm excited for the next story. But with that, I'm going to end things off here. If you enjoyed this story, you already know, leave a like, subscribe, follow the socials, the Patreon, be a member, you know what's good. I look forward to the next one, so it's been someone that's no one, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.